Hello, this is part 3 of the recruitment and retention of transgender staff guidance for employers. My name is Declan O'Dempsey. I'm a barrister at Cloisters Chambers. Let's turn to some practical considerations arising out of that. You need to get an idea of when key changes will take place and how they will fit in with any relevant work deadlines. So it may be that somebody starts on a course of hormonal treatment at one point and this may affect them. You need to know and you need to be accommodating of that kind of important change point where there may be some difficulties caused with the ability to keep up a particular work level, for example. You should also review the records and systems that you have. You need to think about what needs to be changed and in particular when that's going to happen and what will happen to the records that record the old gender. That can be a particular problem if information comes up later on. Managers should encourage the individual to describe what they think will be best for them in terms of communication with colleagues. An issue that causes no end of trouble is the use of facilities. T should be free to select the facilities appropriate to the gender in which they present themselves. So if they've started to live in their acquired gender role on a full-time basis, they should be afforded the right to use the facilities appropriate to the acquired gender role. You should avoid discriminating against anyone with the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, and if you already offer gender neutral toilets and changing facilities, then the risk of creating a barrier for T will be lessened. But it is an issue that the employer simply has to deal with because it is one which crops up quite a lot. There will be absences from work in a transition if it involves any medical process. Absences from work for medical reasons and appointments associated with transition should be recorded but shouldn't be used in relation to absence management. You should, as it were, agree a short-term job change. That may be appropriate in some cases. You may have to have dealings with pensions and insurance people. Information should be shared with them on a need-to-know basis, so think about what it is actually necessary for them to know. In some cases, it'll be necessary in the circumstances of the business to communicate with customers and clients. You should include T in considering how best to communicate the information. And it may be that you'll need to include a plan to deal with media interest. The media can sometimes, depending on the nature of the job, get very excited about the idea that somebody in a particular type of job is transitioning, and there may well be a lot of press comment. You should finally try to respect and try to accommodate any request for anonymity that T may give to you. Inevitably in employment, there is a risk of bullying. Bullying or harassment should be treated with the same degree of seriousness as in other instances. However, the forms of bullying and harassment may be rather more subtle than in other types of case. So, excluding people from distribution lists, persistently using the wrong pronoun to describe the person. That kind of behaviour should be identified and it should be addressed, if necessary, using the disciplinary process. People are very curious about transsexual status and gender reassignment, but you should never allow their or your own natural curiosity about these issues to override sensitivity and respect. Your staff may well have questions, but these should be directed to the reputable sources, for example the ones mentioned at the end of the guide. One thing that can cause a lot of upset for T will be the question of whether there's been a proper check of their details on the system. It's a good idea in any event, for data protection purposes, to maintain a list of the systems, I'd suggest both electronic and paper ones, that hold personal data or references to individual employees. Now these will include your human resources systems, standalone roster systems, but also centralized systems or remote databases. The problem here is that old data which emerge can out T, so you should take responsibility for checking that agreements in relation to information which you have reached with T are actually followed through, and you should double check your online and paper records and your website, etc., just to make sure that that kind of unintended problem does not arise. Finally, there are various types of assistance that you can think which may be useful for T. So an employee assistance program, having role models or mentors, and if your organisation is large enough, champions. Now, a lot of these you may well already have in relation to other protected characteristics, but the guidance makes clear that these ways of assisting people can minimise the risks that your business runs and can help to ensure that your business is a better place for everyone to work in. In terms of retention, it's important, if you're a big enough organisation, to facilitate, if it's necessary, a network, a support network for the person to which they can belong. The guide deals with this at page 16. I want to focus on what it says about communications, however. It's important that eventually communications revert to an ordinary level, the kind of communication you would have with any employee. However, each case is going to differ, so it's important to agree when the support around transition is completed or is no longer necessary, because some people will want a longer support period. After transition is completed, the rule is very simple. The new gender is the correct way of referring to the person. After employment, you may have issues surrounding references, so T may apply for a reference. Well, the usual principles of fairness and accuracy apply. This is something that can be the subject of discrimination proceedings. If T transitioned after leaving employment, it's a good idea to contact T to discuss the reference. The content of the reference, in terms of capabilities, experience, and all the rest of it, will be the same, but you should take a special care around the use of pronouns and names. Remember that the reference is being given to a person who has transitioned, and therefore the acquired gender is the correct gender.